today we will be learning the rules to the official sport of Tiddlywinks, which was derived from but is not the same as the children's game, which basically just involves getting counters into a pot. The playing surface in Winks is very important as it's what allows you to control the Winks. Too hard and you get no height, too soft and you get no distance. Hence, Tiddlywinks matches are played on specifically designed mats which are an appropriate degree of sponginess. As well as a mat, to play Tiddlywinks you also need a pot, which goes in the centre of the mat, and a set of Winks, which are small plastic discs. There are 4 different colours of Winks, and a complete set includes 2 large Winks and 4 small Winks of each colour. You will also need a squidger, which is a larger plastic disc which is used to play the Winks. You'll notice mine has the edges filed down. This is very common and makes it easier to control the Winks. As mentioned, a set of Winks includes 4 colours: blue, green, red and yellow. These 4 colours are split into 2 teams, with blue always with red and green always with yellow. For the purposes of the rules, each colour is treated as an individual player. This makes Winks an ideal game to be played with 4 players in a 2v2 game with each player controlling 1 colour. However, it is also possible for 1 player to control both colours on a single team, meaning it is also possible for Winks to be played by 2 players 1v1 or 3 players 2v1. The game begins with the squidge off. The colours begin with all their Winks in different corners of the mat. Each colour gets to fire 1 Wink towards the pot. Whichever colour lands closest to the pot gets to go first, and also last, but I'll explain that later. Starting with the winner of the squidge off, colours take it in turns to play their Winks, always going in the order blue, green, red, yellow, then back to blue again, which is alphabetical if you struggle to remember. On a standard turn, a colour is allowed to play 1 shot on 1 of their Winks. There are a few exceptions to this. If a colour successfully pots 1 of their Winks, they get to play another shot. This continues until they fail to pot a Wink, then their turn is over and play proceeds as usual. Another exception is when a colour fires 1 of their Winks off the table. The Wink is put back on the table at the nearest point to where it went off, and that colour misses their next turn. The aim of the game is to get as many tiddlies as possible. Tiddlies are a type of point, though it's important not to call them points, as points are a separate thing that we'll get onto later. At the end of the game, a Wink in the pot is worth 3 tiddlies, and a Wink that is not in the pot but is within the playing surface and is not covered by any other Winks is worth 1 tiddly. So there are 2 ways a Wink cannot be worth any points. Either it has not been brought in from the corner since the start of the game, or it is covered by another Wink. The number of tiddlies for each colour is counted, and the colours are individually ranked from 1st to 4th. To put it simply, because of squopping. When Tiddlywinks was first turned from a children's game into a complex sport, it was through the addition of a single rule. Any Wink that is covered by another Wink is not playable. What this means is, if this blue Wink here is covered by this yellow Wink, blue is not allowed to play that Wink. If you remember from earlier, this Wink is also not worth any tiddlies come the end of the game, while the yellow Wink on top is worth 1 tiddly because it is uncovered. The act of using 1 Wink to cover another Wink is called squopping, and we would describe the blue Wink here as squopped. Here we have a 2 Wink pile. What will likely happen now is blue, or their teammate red, will send a Wink over to try and get on top of yellow and take control of the pile so they can free the blue. But yellow and their teammate green will want to protect the pile, and will land on top of any blues or reds to stop them from rescuing the blue, and in order to rescue their own Winks which may now be trapped. You can see how it quickly becomes an incredibly complex game of strategy, teamwork and skill, with teams seeking to squop their opponent's Winks, rescue their own squopped Winks, as well as have some Winks left to get in the pot at the end of the game to maximise their tiddlies. It is also worth noting that this rule applies to your own team's Winks as well as your opponent's. If blue were instead covered by a red, or another blue, the bottom blue would still be unplayable and it would still not be worth any tiddlies come the end of the game. The length of a game of Tiddlywinks depends on the number of players. If 4 people are playing, then it is 25 minutes plus 5 rounds. If 2 players are playing, it is 20 minutes plus 5 rounds. And if 3 players are playing, it is 22.5 minutes plus 5 rounds. Rounds are how a game of Tiddlywinks ends. As soon as the timed portion of the game ends, we enter round 0. We stay in round 0 until the turn of whichever colour won the squidge off. Remember I said as well as first they also get to go last? Their go marks the end of round 0 and 5 more rounds occur until whichever colour won the squidge off ends the game by playing the last shot in round 5. Let's say, for example, blue won the squidge off. The 25 minutes are up and it is red's turn. So red gets a turn in round 0, yellow gets a turn in round 0, and blue takes their turn to end round 0. It is now green's turn in round 1. Then as before, red goes in round 1, yellow goes in round 1, and blue ends round 1. This continues up to round 5. Where green has their last turn, red has their last turn, yellow has their last turn, and finally blue has their last turn, which is also the last turn of the game. This is highly beneficial as it means blue will know exactly what they need to do with their last shot, and they also know that the other team won't get the chance to respond to whatever they do. Hence, winning the squidge off can be a big advantage. The scoring system is complicated. If you've understood everything up to this point, then you are pretty much fully equipped to play the game. So if everything from here on in seems confusing, then please don't be discouraged. It is not necessary to understand it all immediately to enjoy the game, and it's usually picked up through experience anyway. That being said, here is an explanation of the scoring system. As I said earlier, each colour counts up their individual number of tiddlies and will get placed into first, second, third and fourth. The colour that has the most tiddlies will get 4 points. The colour with the second most tiddlies gets 2 points. The colour with the third most tiddlies gets 1 point. And the colour with the least tiddlies gets no points. Each team of colours then adds their points together, and that is the final score for the game. So in this example, blue and red have won 5-2. You may notice this adds up to 7. The final score of a Tiddlywinks game should always add up to 7, and if it doesn't, then something has gone wrong. Now, there may be times when colours end the game on the same number of tiddlies. Say blue got the most tiddlies, red and yellow both had the second most, and green had the least. In this case, red and yellow are sharing both second and third place, so they share the points. Second place gets 2 points, third place gets 1 point, adding those together makes 3 points, so red and yellow are sharing 3 points between them, meaning they get 1.5 points each. So the final score now is 5.5 to blue and red, and 1.5 to green and yellow. If it's a 3-way tie, then the same principle applies. If blue, red and yellow all get the most tiddlies, then they share 4 plus 2 plus 1 points between them, which is 7, so that's 2 1/3 points each, so the final score is 4 2/3 versus 2 1/3. And if all 4 colours have the same number of tiddlies, then points get split 4 ways. But you don't really need to do the math to work out the score will be 3.5, 3.5, because the game has clearly ended a tie and you know the points have to add up to 7. You may have noticed this point system means that whichever colour has the most tiddlies, their team will definitely win. And it is certainly a tactic to have one colour sacrifice itself for the sake of the other, so that the team can win 4-3. However, in most ranking tournaments, the scoreline matters, and often there is a handicap system in place such that if one team is worse than the other, then they will automatically be given a certain point swing advantage. So now if the better team only wins 4-3, the handicap system will turn this into a loss for them because they ought to have won by more. There are cases when as little as half a point in one game decides the outcome of a whole tournament. All of this is just to say that the score really does matter, and it will seldom be a case of just winning, so the throwing one colour under the bus strategy is rarely employed, since it guarantees the very best you can do is win 4-3, and most players want the chance to do better than that. You thought it was over? Not quite yet. It has now been fully explained how a standard game of Tiddlywinks is played. However, there is a scenario within the game where these standard rules are changed, and this is a pot out. A pot out is when one colour manages to get all their winks into the pot before the game has ended. Once this has happened, the game essentially turns into a potting race. Squopping is no longer allowed, and any squopped winks at the time of the pot out are unsquopped and separated while remaining the same distance from the pot. Any winks that are accidentally squopped after the pot out are once again separated. The remaining colours then take their turns following colour order as before, solely attempting to pot their winks. There is no time limit or round limit to this phase of the game, you just keep going until the final scoreline is decided. Once a pot out has occurred, tiddlies are no longer relevant. The first colour to get all their winks into the pot has come in first place. The second colour to get all their winks into the pot comes in second. The third colour to get all their winks into the pot comes in third. And then the other colour comes in last. It's not necessary for them to pot all their winks as the scoreline has already been determined. So clearly potting out is already advantageous as it guarantees victory. However, there is a further advantage. You may have noticed when the scoring was explained earlier that the very best scoreline a team can achieve is 6-1, as if one colour in a team comes in first and the other comes in second, then they will get 4 and 2 points, making 6, while the other team still gets 1 point for coming third. However, when a game ends in a pot out, 1 point is transferred from the losing team to the winning team. meaning it is possible to win a Tiddlywinks match 7-0, but only if you win via pot out and only if both of the colours on your team pot out before either of your opponents. If, say, blue were to pot out first, then yellow, then red, then in this case, blue came first and gets 4 points, yellow gets 2 points, red gets 1 point, and green gets 0 points. So normally blue and red would win 5-2, however because the game ended in a pot out, 1 point gets transferred from the losers to the winners, so blue and red actually win 6-1. From this it may sound like potting out is the obvious thing to do and negates the need for any tactical play at all. And indeed the ultimate goal of Tiddlywinks is to pot out, in the same way that the ultimate goal of football is to get the ball in the back of the net, but this doesn't mean that everybody in football just shoots all the time. If blue were to pot, say, 4 of their winks early on but get squapped by green and yellow before they can pot out, suddenly they're facing a game where they no longer control any winks, and red is having to combat both green and yellow who have double the amount of free winks they do. And remember from earlier that if you pot a wink, that means you get another shot before your turn ends. Therefore it is possible for one colour to pot all their winks in a single turn. So much of the game of winks is actually spent attempting to get one of your colours into a position where they could pot all their winks in one turn, but often the game ends before either team reaches that point, so it becomes a case of maximising the tiddlies you can get in the circumstances. I would say maybe 10 to 20% of matches end in pot outs, and it depends heavily on the situation. If one team is significantly better than the other, then they will definitely be looking to pot out, especially in handicap tournaments where they need to win by a significant margin. However, if the two teams are much closer in ability, then a pot out is less likely, as by committing winks to a pot out, you're sacrificing winks that you may need to combat your opponents later. All this is to say that going for the pot out in itself isn't either good or bad, but will depend heavily on the match you're playing, how good you are, how good your opponent is, how good your teammate is, and the current state of the winks on the mat at the time. So that is an outline of the basic rules of the game. I've tried to only cover rules that are relevant in the majority of games. There are rules for more nuanced situations that will be picked up with more experience, and there might be a separate video explaining them at some point. If this video seems long and complicated, then that's because Tiddlywinks is a complex game, and that's part of what makes it so enjoyable. If you tried explaining your favourite sport from the most basic principles, then you'd probably find it's a lot more complicated than you give it credit for. It just doesn't seem complicated because you're so familiar with it. As with every other sport, every rule that does exist in Tiddlywinks does so to make the game as interesting and competitive as it can be. I hope you found this video informative. If you want to find out more about the sport, please visit the websites for the English Tiddlywinks Association or Cambridge University Tiddlywinks Club, which is where the sport was founded. Thank you for watching.